So this morning, with Yom HaShoah coming up this week, I wanted to talk a little bit about Yom HaShoah, and in particular, the reactions of some of those who encountered the Holocaust as it was happening, as the war in Europe was ending, and how some of those reactions from people hearing about it, people living through it, people liberating others from it, might inform our appreciation of the idea of memory and the idea of Yom HaShoah. We spoke about last year about forgiveness, about when or if can we forgive Nazis, and that was something that was in the news about a survivor who had forgiven the Nazis, on his own, not on behalf of everyone. But how does memory work, or how does remembrance work in terms of Yom HaShoah? And in particular, it may come up in some of the sources or in reaction to them, just the idea of Yom HaShoah, the idea of having a Holocaust Remembrance Day at all as a separate commemoration. Some of these themes will emerge from the discussion of some of the sources, but it came from encountering a couple of articles that described the reactions of some of the chaplains who accompanied the soldiers as they were liberating Buchenwald, Bergen-Belsen in particular, and that led to an exploration, more broadly as the immediate aftermath of the moments of encountering the enormity of the evil of the Holocaust, what those initial reactions might say to us, or how they may inform our appreciation of the idea of memory. And in particular, to start things off with a halachic source, which is something that we just were involved in ourselves. Source number one, the Rambam from the laws of Pesach, dealing with actually the Pesach Seder, very famously, "B'chol dor v'dor chayav adam lirot et atzmo ki'ilu hu yatsa mimitzrayim," is the expression that's found in the Haggadah. In every generation, we have to see ourselves coming out of Egypt. But the Rambam uses the word laharot, which means a person must present himself. It's not just about thinking about it or imagining it, but you actually have to be present at the time of the Exodus, as if he himself has now left the slavery of Egypt. It's not just recounting, it's not retelling, it's not even just remembering. It's about being in the experience as much as possible right then and there. And this, of course, is part of how the Seder becomes an evening, not just of reading text, but of also trying to make ourselves feel part of the text. The idea that it's about showing how the Exodus, may have looked like. We have the matzah and the maror, and some of the practices that individual communities and families may have. People walk around the table, they put matzah on their shoulders to commemorate the dough being on the back. They talk about some communities, they even afflict each other with some types of plagues as a reminder. In certain Sephardic communities, hitting with leeks. All of this is really an extension of what the Rambam is saying is the responsibility of the Seder night. And I think all of us feel this, experience this, know this from our own Seder evenings, and the fact that it's not just reading a text. It's not even just going through the motions. It's about making it come alive. But for the Rambam, he uses language that really explicitly says this is the obligation. This is how we have to experience the Seder, by not just reading, doing, but also going, being there, making ourselves as if we're present right now, leaving Egypt. It's like going into a time machine and coming out as if it was that moment of the Exodus. And I think that what the Rambam is saying about the Exodus is a powerful tool when it comes to try to internalize anything, encounter, any event in history which deserves memory. And I think it's not, the idea of Yisker, which has become such which has always been such a major ritual for Jews, the idea of remembering. We are linked to the past. The past has a certain resonance. At the same time, it can't just be about the past because we don't live in the past. We live in the present. We want to head to the future. I spoke over Yom Tov that there was a time when Yizkor would attract thousands of Jews into the synagogues. Some congregations would have hourly Yizkor services, especially urban congregations. It would be perfect for those who were Jews who were working on the holiday but wanted to still remember. And at the time, there were those who decried this because, what kind of memory is it if you're just coming to remember quickly and then go back to work? Others felt at least they're remembering. But my takeaway from this is that we're not necessarily motivated or animated only about the past, because that was true that we still have that number of Jews coming into Yizkor. That's not the case. We're not programmed to be only about the past. The past is essential. We're built up. We're built on the foundation from it, but it can't just be about the past. And I think there's something to be said with regards to memory, that if we want it to be real, it can't just be about remembering. So the Seder night, we have to present ourselves as if we are right now leaving Egypt. And I think any type of important memory requires some form of projection into the past, some sort of understanding of not just the facts and not even just the memories, but also to try and add a certain emotional quality, which comes in different ways, but comes from encountering those who were experiencing it. And we know when it comes to the Holocaust, especially when it comes to hearing the stories of survivors, that's all very powerful. As time goes by, there are fewer and fewer survivors. I was reading one article where one of the survivors this year, I think they're saying might be the last that the March of the Living has survivors actually accompanying those trips to the concentration camps that go this time of year, and how one survivor in particular felt that now it's on to the next generation. And that's very it's a realistic observation, because that's what happens over time. But it's also what will happen when we don't have the same opportunity to hear firsthand eyewitness accounts. How will we be able to elicit more than just an intellectual experience, just by reading it, or reading the stories and reading the books, if we are not able to hear and listen, to directly, those who were there. A couple of weeks ago on 60 Minutes, there was a piece about an undertaking from I think it was the Shoah Foundation, the one that Steven Spielberg had initially founded, to record people's testimonies. They're developing a virtual reality, artificial intelligence, that the holograms of people who are telling their stories that will be programmed to be interactive. So you can ask questions of the screen, and the individual will answer based upon all of the responses that have already been recorded. If you didn't hear about this or see it, you can look it up online. It's kind of like having a conversation with a person, but it's not the live person, because that person is was recorded and was interviewed with a series of questions, and then programmed that different triggers from questions of the program would give the answers directly from the person. Sounds a little freaky. It sure is. They've already put this into demonstration mode and you're speaking with someone who's survived the Holocaust, who's passed on already, but they're speaking and responding to your direct question today. And so I think that there's something that for when it comes to Yom HaShoah, that as we seek for ways to make it more powerful, more meaning, and also maybe so for those of us who are not necessarily as connected. I imagine people who come forward and attend classes and have these conversations are maybe the more motivated. And those who show up for Yom HaShoah commemorations are probably those types of people also. How can we find ways to make it more compelling for those who are less connected? And so I want to go through some of the reactions, and first to look at what were people doing while when they were first hearing word of the Holocaust. as words started coming out as to what was really taking place in Europe in, early, 1940s, 1941, working in 1942, when the word started getting out, how were they responding? So one response was the religious response. Rabbi J.J. Schachter wrote an article about Holocaust commemoration in Tisha B'Av. It was actually, as I was mentioning before, should Yom HaShoah have its own day of commemoration, or is Tisha B'Av the day that we remember all Jewish tragedies? So that has been a conversation that has occupied the rabbinic and political conversation. We know, of course, that Yom HaShoah on the 27th of Nisan was a date set by the Knesset. It's connected to the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, although not directly, because that was really on Pesach. So, but Schachter mentions that the chief rabbinate of Israel assumed a major role in determining the nature of the religious reaction to the newly recognized reality, right, as word started to come out of the murder of Jews in Europe. Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac Halevi Herzog, Ashkenazi chief rabbi since 1937, announced that December 2nd, 1942, 23 Cecily 5703 would be a day of fasting and prayer. Yom Tzom Gadol ve'Evel Kaved Kalali. And he involved rabbis from many countries around the world: Egypt, Iran, Syria, Lebanon, Turkey, India, England, South Africa, Australia, and America, to partner with him in this endeavor. On that day, a massive crowd of thousands, including several hundred rabbis, led by the revered Rebbe of Gur, gathered first in the Chorva synagogue in Jerusalem's Old City, then at the Kotel. They heard sounds of the shofar, recited prayers, including verses from the Book of Lamentations and selections from Tisha B'Av's keynote. Chief Rabbin of Israel also attempted to address the matter of Holocaust commemoration in a meeting of rabbis held under its auspices in the Chorva in March of 1945, right before the war ended. It decided to designate the last week in Adar as a one-time week of mourning for the victims of the Holocaust, like Shiva, followed by a full-day fast on Erev Rosh Chodesh Nisan. So there was the grappling with how to process this religiously, spiritually. That was undertaken on behalf of rabbinic leadership. And I think that what we see, as much as there was a lot of confusion and a lot of smoke, a lot of noise surrounding how to respond on all levels, whether it be communally, whether it be politically, and the like. Religiously also, this was the word that comes to mind is the bilbul, right? This was, what are we supposed to do? How are we supposed to respond? We know that we have fast days and prayer days when bad things are happening. We know that when people die, we sit Shiva. How are we supposed to respond? It is like a head spinning that's taking place. And, I think that, that is, reflects the enormity and the unprecedented nature of how, how people are encountering something like this for the first time. If you're familiar with the Tisha B'Av liturgy, they talk about the destruction of the Second Temple, and Josephus describes hundreds of thousands, over 1 million people being killed as part of that destruction. Remember, that was 2,000 years ago. This is something that's happening right now, right in front, much more visceral, much more connected, much more with much more attention focused on it in terms of media. And even though it was a lot less timely information coming out in the 1940s compared to what we have today, it certainly, people were more connected around the world in 1942 than they were in the year 72. So you have you're being bombarded and confronted with a lot more information, whether it be facts or whether it be stories or whether it be images, and it's something that you don't know how to process. And I think that this, if we move from the rabbinic response as this was taking place to the encounter with the enormity of this all at the moments of liberation, one of the ways to analyze how people were responding to this, maybe from the eyes of the survivors. And a couple of survivor reactions in sources 3 and 4. And there was an article some years ago in a couple of years ago in the New York Times. There was a series documenting some of the lesser known stories of World War II. This was 2 years ago, almost exactly 2 years ago. And so some of these some of the survivors. These two accounts I found from that article, right? Primo Levi in his The Reawakening, source 3. They did not greet us, nor did they smile. They seemed oppressed not only by compassion, but by a confused restraint which sealed their lips and bound their eyes to the funereal scene. It was that shame we knew so well, every time we had to watch or to submit to some outrage. The shame that the Germans did not know that the just man experiences at another man's crime. Right, and this is the stories of the soldiers who were liberating, on the one hand being completely overwhelmed, sickened by what they were encountering, but at the same time maintaining a certain amount of distance and detachment because how to process what they're encountering, and this is something that has been noted in various articles and accounts of the liberators. Recently, I started reading a book. We'll come to a quote a little bit later from it by Rafi Medoff. Rafi Medoff is a historian who has written significantly on the Holocaust and the American response to the Holocaust and FDR's response to the Holocaust, head of the David Wyman Institute for Holocaust Studies. And Wyman, of course, having written the book, While 6 Million Died, and recognizing the abandonment of the Jews. So Rafi Medoff, great scholar, someone who I've had occasion to meet, recently wrote a book, I think it was last year, about Rabbi Herschel Schachter. Rabbi Herschel Schachter was a prominent Jewish leader. He's Rabbi J.J. Schachter's father, and he was a chaplain in the army that liberated Buchenwald. But the book has a lot of detailed information about that the liberators' response, and as well as what it was like to be the eyewitness, but also trying to get into the mentality of what's in the psyche and how difficult it was. He just in terms of what the people, what the soldiers, what the chaplains were thinking when they went into these concentration camps. They had heard of concentration camps, they had heard of the murder of the Jews, but Eino dome real ishmiya. You can't compare seeing it to hearing about it, and the information was very murky. And here you're encountering it for the first time, and there's a certain overwhelming of the senses. What you're seeing, what you're smelling, what you're hearing. Combined with what you think should be happening and not being able to comprehend, that's something that the survivors recognized in the liberators. Source number 4, a French survivor, Robert Antalme. We wanted to at least to speak, to be heard. We were told that by itself our physical appearance was eloquent enough, right? What they see should be enough for them to understand it. But we wanted to speak and to be heard. It was impossible to bridge the gap we discovered between the words at our disposal and that experience. What we had to tell would start to seem unimaginable, right? What you're seeing is impossible to believe, and then how are you going to describe something that's impossible to believe? And so there was that. There was this tremendous intellectual and emotional disconnect that is being noted here by these survivors and their analysis of what's taking place in the eyes and minds of the liberators. But these are the types of anecdotes and experiences which give us a little bit of a different insight into what was happening. We have facts and we have figures and we have narratives and we have our own family stories, but how do we try and generate this laharot, to present ourselves, to try and put ourselves in the shoes, as it were, and an experience that defies description, imagination, in that ability. Just questions, comments, reactions before moving on to the reaction of the chaplains who were there, and then we'll look at some of the spiritual reactions of survivors and those who witnessed it.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
Linda left this morning for Pennsylvania. She's going to be speaking to a Hillel group about her experiences at college group. And then tomorrow she's going to be speaking at my granddaughter's synagogue, where she's the rabbi also on that subject.
Well, the people who were, who experienced it, those are the ones who we should be, soaking in as much as we can from their stories. Because, similar to what I said, you can't compare seeing to hearing. So, the people who are there themselves, we depend on them. So that is, that is important work. And as you know, Linda's in demand. I was too late to grab her this year. Maybe another time.
It's too expensive for you, Rabbi.
I guess. Maybe her, I know someone who can get me a little bit of a discount. But
sadly, those survivors are diminishing.
Right. And so I think that trying to craft another way of telling this story or looking at the story to give us different perspectives or fresh perspectives, it becomes important. We can't replace that, but we have to continue to find ways to that are engaging. As I said before, some people's mentality, some people's upbringing, some people's overall religious historical approach makes them more, or family experience makes them more, can feel more connected to this, right? There are the people who show up every year at a HaShoah commemoration because the grandfather or the great grandparents survived, or because they grew up raised in an environment where it was important to show up at HaShoah. Right? I still remember, growing up, it was always the Sunday after Pesach in New Haven, Connecticut, where they had, it was actually, I think, one of the first municipal Holocaust memorials that the city put up to remember the Holocaust. And that's where we would gather there would be speeches, and then there would be a walk to the nearby synagogue for further lectures, right? But I don't think my experience was all that typical, because plenty of people weren't there for those types of things. And I think it's important to have it's important to continue to focus on that path of Holocaust commemoration. At the same time, I think that it's helpful to look at other pathways and roads that lead us to the appropriate commemoration and appreciation of how the Holocaust should still resonate. I think that's why, for many, the Tisha B'Av, just stick with Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av's on the calendar. Tisha B'Av has worked. Tisha B'Av continues to work. That was something Rabbi Joseph Salvation felt strongly about. And that and J.J. Schachter in his article talks about, has Yom HaShoah just become kind of just like automatic? Just even in Israel, where it's a government mandated day of remembrance, is that enough if it's not animated, if it's not supplemented with a certain emotional, spiritual, other ways to try and connect with people and get them to lower their resistance to feeling and to experiencing? People have come up with different mechanisms and different rituals, a Holocaust Seder, all different types of things have been attempted to try and open up ramps for people to get on the appropriate way to appreciate. I think that, in a sense, I'm suggesting that Pesach, which pushes us to see ourselves as being there and doing things or having experiences which may bring us back in time, maybe that's something to add to Yom HaShoah, to appreciate how completely disorienting this has been for us spiritually, to see how the survivors felt as they were being liberated and the disconnect they felt with their liberators, to hear how those trying to provide spiritual assistance responded. That's what we're going to do next. Leslie Hardman and Cecily Goodman. Leslie Hardman was a British chaplain who was there for the liberation of Bergen-Belsen. And source number 5, towards me came what seemed to be the remnants of a Holocaust, a staggering mass of blackened skin and bones held together somehow with filthy rags. My God, the dead walk, I cried aloud. but I did not recognize my voice. Peering at the double star, the emblem of Jewry on my tunic, right, his chaplain symbol, one poor creature touched and then stroked the badge of my faith, and finding that it was real, murmured, Rabbiner, Rabbiner. And if you want, there's a link on the sources for of him telling the story. He told the story in 2008, just before passing away at the age of a couple months before passing away at the age 95. And you see a picture of him reciting the Kaddish next to a mass grave in Bergen-Belsen. And you know, the unreality, the incomprehensibility of what they were encountering in trying to provide spiritual support, I think is a very powerful reminder of that this was, yes, evil. This was the murder of 6 million Jews, and this was World War II. But there was a certain, try to pull at the strings that will add a certain amount of, you know, kind of emotional, an emotional charge to the remembrance. I think can be helpful. And you know, it also is a reminder of the power of some of these stories, which have been available on video for the people who were there to tell their stories, is important.
Excuse me, Rabbi, the last
yes.
person you were speaking of? Who is
So
the last?
This is Leslie Hardman. He was a British chaplain.
I see.
Who was there for the liberation of Bergen-Belsen. So then, Rabbi Meir Soloveitchik wrote about another chaplain last year, source number 6, joining Leslie Hardman in praying for the dead and ministering to the survivors was another ardent Zionist, Herman Helfgott, a Hungarian rabbi serving in the Yugoslavian army who had himself just been freed from a POW camp. In an interview with Yad Vashem, Helfgott recounted how one survivor, a mother, had beseeched him to defy British policy and bury her dead daughter in a single grave. This he did in the dark of night, but the prayers, he reported, were offered not by him, but by the mother herself. She looked up to heaven and she said, "Master of the universe," in Yiddish, I thank you for the great privilege you gave me today, burying my daughter with my own hands. Amen. From that moment on, I have to say, I was a different man. And just, you know, as an example, here too, we have these stories from the, you know, we could hear them tell their own stories. I think if we just, for a moment, we'll just spend a moment, in just 2 minutes, he tells his story. I'll share the video with you on the screen.
They're intervening, capital controls.
אני עברתי יום יום מבלוק לבלוק לראות מי נפטר, להוציא אותם ולקבור אותם. אבל מה? הייתה פקודה מאנגלים שאי אפשר קבר אחים לעשות בגלל המחלות, אלא קבר אחים. קבר אחים. כולם יחד. כלומר, שורה אחת, נגיד 20-30, על זה כן סיד, כן, ועל זה שוב כן איזה 30-20 וזה, כמו שהיה במחנה המוות הזה, איפה שאלפים כן. אבל יום אחד ניגשה אליי אישה ואמרה לי, רבי, שמעתי היום שבבלוק הזה וזה, ביתי נפטרה. אז אמרתי, אז מה לעשות? אני רוצה קבר בשבילה, קבר יחיד. אמרתי, אבל זה בלתי אפשרי. אבל לכן אני מבקשת ממך. אז אמרתי לה, את יודעת מה? בלילה כשחיילים בדרך כלל, האנגלים, נמצאים במועדונים, אז אנחנו נקבור אותם. אנחנו נביא את הגופה, ואנחנו כן נקבור אותם. ובאמת, בלילה היא קמה מהמיטה, ואני ניסיתי מהר לקבור אותה, קדיש להגיד, ופתאום כשאני רציתי כבר סתום את הגולל, היא אומרת לי, רגע אחד רבי, והיא פנתה עם העיניים לשמיים ואמרה, ריבונו של עולם, ביידיש, אני מודה לך לזכות הגדולה שנתת לי היום לקבור את ביתי במו ידיים. אמן. מרגע זה אני מוכרח להגיד, נעשיתי אדם אחר.
Right, it's you can't compare reading his story than to listening to him tell his own story. Imagine actually, being there when the story takes place. Just underneath source number 6 is a little bit of a picture of a ketubah that Hardman wrote in Bergen-Belsen. In the aftermath, when the survivors were being recuperating, rehabilitating, he wrote a ketubah, from memory. You could just sort of make out Beshishi B'Shabbos, right? It says on the third line, we're talking about the location. It says Bergen-Belsen, Germania. The idea that the spiritual heroism that was experienced in reaction to this, is another, the idea that, there was a certain pain and dissonance and uncomprehension that existed on the part of survivors between them and their liberators. And here on the spiritual side, there's a very powerful reaction to move forward, the emotions that are found, we can appreciate a mother wanting to have her child buried properly, but to be the one to defy the orders and to do it and to listen to that mother, give thanks for that opportunity. As we heard, he's a different person ever since. In line with that type of spiritual reaction, how that was witnessed, source number 7, and this I'll also play, because it's hard to find a transcript. There's a piece of a transcript there from a journalist, Patrick Gordon Walker, who's a BBC journalist, who was at Bergen-Belsen after it was liberated. It was April 20th, 1945. It was the first Friday night. It was the first Friday night there. And to take a listen to his reports, they found the archives. They found this and made it more able to listen to it
7
again.
years ago today.
Let me just put that on as well. There's images there. Obviously, there's no video, but we can hear the report.
A remarkable recording was made in the German concentration camp of Bergen-Belsen. The recording became part of a radio report on the liberation of that death camp that was filed by Patrick Gordon Walker, who worked for the BBC.
This is London calling North America.
The day I reached Belsen concentration camp, the 5th day of liberation, was a Friday, the day before the Jewish Sabbath. Something like half the surviving prisoners at Belsen were Jews, and the Jewish chaplain to the British Second Army, the Reverend L.H. Hardman, held an eve of the Sabbath service in the open air in the midst of the camp. It was the first Jewish service that many of the men and women present had taken part in for 6 years. It was probably the first Jewish service held on German soil in absolute security and without fear for a decade. Around us lay the corpses that there had not been time to clear away even after 5 days. 40,000 or more had been cleared, but there were still 1,000 or 2,000 around. And people were still lying down and dying in broad daylight in front of our eyes. This was the background to this open-air Jewish service. During the service, the few hundred people gathered together were sobbing openly, with joy at their liberation, and with sorrow at the memory of their parents and brothers and sisters that had been taken from them and gassed and burned. These people knew they were being recorded. They wanted the world to hear their voice. They made a tremendous effort, which quite exhausted them. Listen.
Yisrael Chai, the children of Israel still liveth.
Survivors of Bergen-Belsen's.
So that was the recording. Obviously, the words of Atik would change once there was a state, but and then you hear at the end the chaplain declaring the Am Yisrael Chai. So that was the reaction. This is these are the scenes that those who were there immediately after liberation were bearing witness to, and beginning to also see the spiritual responses of the survivors themselves. Another example of that in source number 8. This is the book I mentioned by Rafi Medoff, and Rabbi Herschel Schachter was experiencing these services in Buchenwald. So he broke the matzahs. He was giving out matzah at a service. It wasn't Pesach, but that's what he had to give out. That was, Jewish food that he had with him because it was right after Pesach, into as many small pieces as possible and distributed them to eager attendees for whom they represented their Jewish identity that had been suppressed for so long. They pounced on the matzah crumbs. One man jumped up on the lectern holding matzah and shouted out the Hamotzi and Shechianu blessings. Shechianu is a declaration of gratitude for a special occasion, such as a holiday or the wearing of a new garment for the first time. But in this case, Schachter later observed, what occasion is more appropriate for Shechianu than their delivery from death? So the idea of Shechianu being intoned immediately, and then Schachter had an army driver who was his assistant who wrote a letter home to his wife. Yesterday was Pesach Shani, That's the 14th of Iyar. There were about 1,500 people at the Seder. Again, Pesach Sheni is not a time for a Seder, but it's a chance for those who missed Pesach the first time. So you can imagine how they felt receiving matzah, which they hadn't tasted or even seen for about 5 years. The miraculous thing about it was that not one of them ate a piece of matzah until the chaplain said the blessing over the matzah. The idea of the ritual sanctity of the moment is what Shulman is noting. He goes on to say how everyone crowded around, grabbing the cigarettes and the other articles, but when it came time to the matzah and the seder, everyone was dignified and solemn. But that too, the idea that in the immediate days and weeks after liberation, in addition to the horror and in addition to the trauma that's being felt on both sides, people who are not able to comprehend it, people who underwent all this pain, there begins to be the certain resolute nature of as the chaplain intoned, Am Yisrael Chai. So that's another element of trying to be present and present ourselves with this type of imagery, with this type of experience, in connection with Yom HaShoah. The third element of this, right? We started talking about or maybe the fourth, how they were responding to the news, how the survivors themselves felt, how those who were liberating or witness to the liberation felt. What was the response to going forward? How would we, continue to recall or remember or show that, Hitler lost and we won? So just, two interesting ways of doing this that I came across, over the last couple of months. First is actually, it's from December, this past December, where there was someone by the name of Ed Shamus. And he was a Band of Brothers vet who toasted son's bar mitzvah with Hitler's cognac. All right, so what's his story? Ed Shamus described his Jewish self. He used the term tough SOB. Shamus, the oldest surviving member of the legendary Easy Company, Parachute Infantry Regiment, could also have added patient. Easy Company, where they made the show Band of Brothers about, or the book, and then the TV show. Shamus, who died December 3rd at age 99 at his home in Norfolk, Virginia, in 1945, secured bottles of cognac designated for Hitler's use only from the palace of the man who wanted to wipe the Jews from the earth. He waited until 1961 to open one. The occasion was a bar mitzvah, his son's commitment to a Jewish future. Shamus was one of the first U.S. troops to enter Dachau, but would not speak of the experience. That was something he couldn't or wouldn't speak about. About his prize of Hitler's cognac, he was more voluble. Revenge served cold in a shot glass seemed worth it. Although Shamus said the bottle he opened his son's bar mitzvah was soon gone. My buddy Lee Cantor finished that bottle and I threw it out, he said, in 2015. You know, it would be worth $15,000 today. So the reaction, how to handle Dachau, that wasn't something he could talk about. But to thumb in the eye of Hitler by drinking l'chaim on his cognac at his son's bar mitzvah, that became the reaction. That's the vengeance. And of a similar nature, it was a couple months ago, also reported about a Jewish wedding at a Nazi enclave. It was a middle finger extended to Hitler. And there's a piece from the original news report, Orthodox wedding at Berchtesgaden, right? And the story there is that Felice Jacobs and Alan Feldstein could have tied the knot in Phoenix where they had met and where his mother worked at the local Reform synagogue. Or could they have had their wedding in the U.S. Army base in Austria, where Alan was stationed at the time. Instead, they chose the Eagle's Nest, the Nazis' former mountain retreat in the Bavarian Alps, a location, as far as anyone knew, had never before hosted a Jewish wedding. We got married there because my husband wanted to thumb his nose at Hitler, Felice Feldstein recalled last week. Taking place just 10 years after Hitler's defeat, the Feldsteins' August 1955 nuptials were so notable. Jewish Telegraphic Agency covered them at the time, identifying the event as the first Orthodox Jewish wedding celebrating the town of Berchtesgaden, Hitler's mountain retreat, and to this day, a hotbed of Nazism. According to family lore, Mark Feldstein recalled his father's mother was critical when the couple announced their third pregnancy. They had 4 children. She asked, why are they having so many children? Well, Hitler murdered 6 million, his father responded. She shot back, you didn't have to make them all up, do you? In any event, we see there's a certain personality of someone who wanted to show that we're continuing forward. You who tried to destroy us in a place where you would have celebrated that destruction, we're celebrating a Jewish wedding, beginning of a Jewish family of 4 children. And so I think that too is an example of other presentations of commemoration of the eternal nature of the Jewish people, of Jewish survival, of Jewish continuity, that provide us with a couple of different ways of looking at memory in Yom HaShoah, but also to try and give us snapshots of being present, or being, witness to these reactions and responses, so that our Yom HaShoah experience, like our Seder experience, has a different emotional and intellectual tug. Happy to take questions and comments.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
The single most